The morning began with the accusation bell. Its harsh clang shattered the air as villagers dragged a young woman into the square. Her name was Kira, and she had not spoken a word in 7 years. "She's the cause," someone shouted. "The curse came with her." Kira's eyes were wide but calm. Her lips sealed as they had been since childhood fever stole her voice. She tried to shake her head to show them they were wrong, but fear had made them blind. The ground beneath her feet pulsed with unnatural warmth, as if something massive breathed below the earth. Shadows gathered around her ankles, darker than any natural darkness should be. They writhed like living creatures, twisting up her legs. The crowd gasped and stepped back. "Look!" a woman screamed. "She brings darkness." The village elder raised his hand for silence. But before anyone could speak, the earth groaned. A crack appeared, thin as a hair, then widened rapidly. The ground was splitting open, and Kira stood at its very center. "But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began." If only they had known what they welcomed through their gates. 3 months before, the village of Millbrook was peaceful in its struggles. The people were farmers, working land that had grown tired after generations. Harvests were small. Bellies were often empty. But the people were kind to each other, sharing what little they had. Kira lived on the edge of the village with her grandmother. Though she could not speak, people were patient with her. She communicated through gestures and drawings. The villagers had known her since birth and understood her silence. That spring morning, Kira was drawing water from the well when she noticed a stranger approaching the village gates. He was tall and handsome, dressed in fine clothes that looked too clean for a traveler. His smile was warm as he greeted the gatekeepers. But what made Kira's blood freeze was something nobody else seemed to notice. He called them by name, every single one. These were people he had never met, yet he knew their names, their children's names, and even their private struggles. The stranger introduced himself as Silas. Within days he transformed everything. He gathered the village council and shared impossible knowledge. He taught them farming methods they had never seen and showed them how to rotate crops in beautiful patterns. He led rituals at dawn and dusk, asking people to speak their gratitude aloud to the earth. Then the impossible happened. Seeds planted using Silas's teachings sprouted overnight. Within days, crops that should have taken months stood tall and heavy with fruit. The fields exploded with colors nobody had seen before. Vegetables grew to impossible sizes. Hunger disappeared from Millbrook like morning mist. People celebrated wildly. They danced in streets that had known only worry. They lifted Silas onto their shoulders, calling him a blessing sent from heaven. Feasts were prepared. Songs of joy filled the air. Every face in the village wore a smile. Every face except one. Kira stood apart watching. When she took grain from the new harvest to feed her grandmother's chickens, the birds refused to touch it. They scattered away like it was poison, their eyes rolling white with terror. While others rejoiced, Kira watched. She noticed things speaking people seemed too busy to see. The way Silas's footprints left faint marks in the soil. The way shadows pooled darker around him. The way animals grew silent when he passed. One afternoon, Kira knelt in the field where Silas had performed his first ritual. There, pressed into the earth where he had stood, was a symbol she had never seen before. It looked like a spiral feeding into itself, with sharp marks radiating outward. Something about it made her head ache and her stomach turn. She glanced around quickly, then used her shawl to gather loose soil over the mark, hiding it from view. That night sleep would not come. Every time Kira closed her eyes, she saw that symbol burning, flames licking around its edges. A voice she could not quite hear whispered words she could not quite understand. She woke gasping, her grandmother's worried face hovering over her. Kira tried to smile, but her hands shook as she reached for her writing slate. In the dim candlelight, she scratched out words. "Something is wrong with the stranger." The next morning, Kira tried to warn them. She gathered stones in the village square and arranged them, forming the symbol she had seen. She drew pictures showing crops growing too fast, animals fleeing, and shadows moving unnaturally. She pointed frantically at Silas's house, then at the symbol, then at the fields. People gathered around her, curious at first, then uncomfortable. Old Barnaby shook his head sadly. Poor girl. Her silence has driven her to seeing shadows. Others laughed with pitying amusement. Then Silas appeared. He knelt beside Kira, his smile gentle. Please, friends, do not mock her. She is frightened by change, that is all. Imagine living without words. How strange new things must seem. He turned to Kira, his eyes kind but somehow empty. It is all right. I know you are just trying to help. The crowd murmured approvingly. Several people patted Kira's shoulder as they dispersed, thanking Silas for his understanding. But as the square emptied, Silas caught Kira's arm. His grip was gentle but firm. For just a moment his mask slipped. His eyes met hers with perfect clarity. He knew that she knew. And he was telling her it did not matter. That night the children began screaming. Little Finn, the blacksmith's son, woke the entire house with terrified shrieks. Then Olenna, the weaver's daughter. Then more, spreading like sickness through the village. Every child described the same nightmare. A voice buried deep underground, calling their names, begging them to come closer, to dig down and find it, to set it free. Parents rushed to Silas for answers. He gathered everyone at dawn, his face grave. This is natural, he explained calmly. When a village transforms so quickly, the mind struggles to accept it. Your children are simply adjusting to peace after knowing only hardship. The nightmares will fade. The parents chose comfort over concern. They nodded, convincing themselves their children would adapt. They went home, held their babies close, and tried to forget the screams. But Kira could not forget. 'Cause that night she heard it too. While awake, while standing at her window, staring at fields that glowed faintly under the moon. The whisper came not through her ears but through her bones. It vibrated in her chest where her lost voice used to live. Knew her name. It knew she could hear it. And it was calling. 3 weeks after Silas arrived, Callum the shepherd disappeared. He had gone to check his flock in the northern pasture, where crops had grown fastest. When he did not return by nightfall, search parties went looking. They found his staff, waterskin, and boots arranged in a perfect circle in the middle of the field. But no Callum, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just those 3 items, placed with impossible precision. And the crops inside the circle had withered to black husks, while everything outside remained lush. Panic rippled through the village. Mothers kept children indoors. Men carried weapons to the fields. The joy that had filled their streets curdled into suspicious silence. That evening, Silas called another gathering. I understand your fear, he said. But I can offer protection. A blessing drawn from the same source that gave you prosperity. Let me perform a ritual, and no harm will come to any who accept my guidance. People looked at each other, desperate and afraid. Finally, the village elder nodded. Please, help us. Silas smiled. And Kira saw something flicker behind his eyes. Satisfaction. The blessing ceremony took place at dusk. The entire village gathered in a circle around Silas. He drew symbols in the dirt, lit candles at precise points, and led the people in a chant of protection and gratitude. As the sun set, the candles flared brighter than they should. A warm glow spread through the crowd. Fear visibly drained from faces. Shoulders relaxed. Children who had been clinging to their parents began to play again. For a moment it seemed like everything would be all right. The problem was solved. People laughed with relief. They hugged each other. They thanked Silas with tears streaming down their faces. Even Kira's grandmother seemed calmer, the worry lines on her face smoothing slightly. Kira wanted to believe it too. But standing at the edge of the crowd, she watched with growing dread. When Silas drew his symbols in the dirt, she recognized them. They were variations of the symbol she had hidden in the field. And beneath the small altar Silas had constructed, the same symbol glowed faintly in the earth, not fading, growing stronger, fed by their trust, their gratitude, and their willing submission. The next morning, Kira went to the village well before dawn. The water tasted different now, slightly bitter. Animals had started refusing to drink from it. She lowered herself into the well using the maintenance rope, holding a lantern in her teeth. About 20 feet down, she found what she was looking for. Carved deep into the stone were symbols. Dozens of them, forming a spiral that descended into the dark water below. They matched the ones she had seen in the fields, the ones Silas used in his rituals. Kira's hands shook as she traced them. These marks were old. Far older than Silas. Older than anyone in the village. They had been carved when the well was first built. Whatever Silas had awakened, it was not new. It had been waiting here all along, sleeping. And the village had been built right on top of it. Kira climbed back up quickly, her mind racing. Silas had not brought the curse to them. He had simply woken something that had always been here, something their ancestors had tried to seal away. And the village had invited him to break those seals. That afternoon, an old man appeared at the village gates. Kira recognized him vaguely. Bias, an outcast who had been driven away before she was born for spreading dangerous superstitions. He looked ancient now, his hair wild and white, but his eyes were sharp. "The listener has returned," he shouted. "I warned you. I told your parents, your grandparents. They fed it with their silence. And now it is strong enough to feed on you." The guards moved to remove him, but people had gathered. "What listener?" someone called. "The spirit that was here before the village. It feeds on obedience, on unquestioning acceptance, on silence." Tobias's wild eyes scanned the crowd until they found Kira. He froze, recognition crossing his face. "You," he whispered, pointing at her. "You can hear it too, can't you?" The crowd turned to look at Kira. Her face flushed as she nodded slowly. Tobias laughed like breaking glass. "Of course. The silent ones always hear the loudest." The guards grabbed him, dragging him toward the gates. But as they passed Kira, Tobias leaned close and whispered, "Your silence is your power. Do not let them make you afraid of it." Over the following weeks, the price of Silas's peace became impossible to ignore. Livestock grew sickly despite abundant feed. The children who had suffered nightmares became listless, barely eating. And most disturbing, the people who praised Silas most frequently began to weaken. They moved slowly, spoke quietly, their eyes growing dull and distant. Kira noticed the pattern. The more someone praised Silas, the more their energy drained away. The more they obeyed his suggestions, the more their personality faded. They were being slowly erased, replaced by hollow copies that smiled and nodded but had nothing inside. Kira started writing observations in a journal. She documented who got sick and when, noted patterns in the symbols, and tracked how the village was changing. The evidence was clear. Obedience was the currency Silas demanded, and the cost was self. One evening, as Kira was drawing water, Silas appeared beside her. They were alone in the square. "You should be more careful," he said quietly. "Walking around with such troubled thoughts. It disturbs the peace I have worked so hard to create." Kira did not look at him, but her hands shook on the bucket. "I have been nothing but kind to this village," Silas continued, his voice gentle. "I ask for nothing but gratitude and trust. Yet you persist in seeing darkness where there is only light." He stepped closer. "I could help you too. I could give you back your voice. Would you like that?" For a moment, the offer hung in the air like honey. To speak again, to explain, to warn, to be understood. But Kira looked at him and saw the truth in his smile. Her voice would not be her own. It would be his speaking through her. She shook her head firmly. Something flickered across Silas's face. Then he laughed softly. "How fascinating. Most people would give anything to have what they have lost returned. As he spoke, Kira noticed his shadow on the cobblestones. While Silas stood perfectly still, his shadow moved. It writhed and stretched, reaching toward her like it had its own will. Kira stumbled back, pointing at it. Silas glanced down. For just a moment, his mask cracked completely. His smile became something ancient and hungry. "Yes," he said softly. "I know you understand. The question is, what will you do about it?" That night, Kira wandered to the old meeting hall. Had been abandoned years ago. The door was locked, but she slipped through a broken window. Inside, dust covered everything. She noticed certain floorboards were newer than others, arranged in a pattern. She pried one up. Beneath was a narrow chamber. Kira lowered herself down carefully. Her lantern revealed a small sealed room. The walls were covered in ancient carvings. They told a story. A spirit born from collective fear, fed by unquestioning obedience, growing stronger with each generation that chose comfort over truth. The carvings showed how it could take different forms, savior or demon, depending on what would gain more followers. And they showed how it was sealed, not with force but with truth, with people choosing to see clearly rather than believe easy lies. At the bottom of the final carving, Kira found something that made her heart stop. A list of people marked as keepers of balance. Their carved 3 generations back was her family name. Her grandmother's grandmother had been a keeper. And the last name on the list, added in fresher carving, was her own. Kira ran home and shook her grandmother awake. The old woman's eyes opened slowly. Kira thrust her journal forward, opened to the page where she had sketched the carvings, pointing frantically at the names. Her grandmother stared for a long moment. Then tears filled her eyes. "I hoped you would never have to know," she whispered. "Your great-grandmother was the last keeper." She tried to warn the village when she felt the listener stirring. But they called her mad. She died trying to strengthen the seals alone. Her grandmother took Kira's hands. "Our family was chosen because we understood something crucial. True power is not in speaking loudest. It is in observing clearly, in seeing what others miss, in having the courage to stand apart." She touched Kira's throat gently. "When you lost your speech, I thought it was just illness. But now I wonder if it was preparation. The listener feeds on spoken obedience. Your silence is not weakness. It is immunity." She pulled an old wooden box from beneath her bed and opened it. Inside was a stone, smooth and dark, covered in symbols that seemed to shift in the lamplight. "This is the listening stone. It reveals truth when faced with honesty. But it only activates for those who are truly unheard." Her grandmother explained how the stone worked while Kira held it, feeling its strange warmth. The keepers used this to expose the listener whenever it returned. The spirit feeds on spoken agreements. But this stone responds to honest silence, to truth that does not need words. She showed Kira symbols carved into its surface, teaching her their meanings. "When the time comes, you will know how to use it. But understand, the listener cannot be killed. It is too old, too deeply woven into human fears. Can only be exposed, forced to show its true nature so people can choose to reject it." Kira held the stone close, feeling it pulse gently. As she did, something changed in the air. A vibration almost imperceptible. Her grandmother felt it too. They looked at each other with growing dread. Across the village, in the house where Silas stayed, a window slammed open. Kira knew he had felt the stone activate. He knew what she held now, what she was. The careful game was over. Now it was a race. Could Kira expose the truth before Silas convinced the village to silence her permanently? That night, neither of them slept. They sat together, holding the stone, preparing for morning and the battle it would bring. Silas moved quickly. By dawn, news had spread. Another disappearance. Then another. The baker's son. The tanner's wife. Both were last seen near the fields Silas had blessed. But this time, Silas had a new explanation. He called a meeting in the square, his face grave. "I have sensed a dark presence among us," he announced. "Someone who resists harmony. Who carries an object of ancient malice." His eyes found Kira. The silent woman. She holds a cursed stone that draws misfortune. Every disappearance, every sickness, they began when she retrieved that cursed object. The crowd turned to stare. People she had known her entire life looked at her with suspicion and fear. "I have tried to protect her," Silas continued, his voice heavy with false regret. "But she refuses. And now others pay the price." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "She must be stopped," someone called. "For the safety of us all." Others joined in, their voices rising. Before Kira could react, hands grabbed her arms. The accusation bell began to ring. And she was dragged toward the square, toward judgment, toward an ending Silas had carefully orchestrated. They bound Kira near the fields, at the spot where Silas had performed his first ritual. The entire village gathered in a circle. Faces she had known since childhood stared with fear, anger, and something worse, relief. Relief that blame had been assigned. Kira's grandmother tried to push through the crowd, but they held her back gently. "It is for the best," someone told her. The stone had been taken from Kira and locked in the elder's house. Her hands were tied behind her back, rope cutting into her wrists. Silas stood before the crowd, leading them in prayer for protection. As he spoke, Kira felt it. The ground beneath her is beginning to pulse. Not with natural warmth, but with something alive and hungry. The crops began to sway, though there was no wind. Shadows pooled deeper between the furrows. Several people shifted nervously. But Silas's voice grew louder, drowning out doubt. "Let the earth judge," he called. "Let the land itself show us the truth." The ground was breathing now. Kira could feel something massive stirring in the depths below. The village stood ready to feed one of their own to the very thing they had been praising. And they did not even know it. Bound and helpless, Kira forced herself to be still. She stopped fighting, stopped struggling. She closed her eyes and focused inward, on the place where her voice used to live. If only silence could scream, she thought. If only they could hear what I have been trying to tell them. But then she realized maybe they could. Not through words but through clarity. Through pure, focused truth that lives beneath language. Kira thought about the listening stone locked away. She thought about the connection she had felt when she first held it. And she pushed that silence outward. Made it as loud and clear as any shout. Focused it like a beam of light cutting through fog. The stone, hidden in its locked chest, began to vibrate. Faintly at first, then stronger, then violently. The elder felt it through the walls and ran to check, confusion flooding his face. In the field, the ground's breathing grew more violent. The crops began to wither rapidly, turning black and crumbling to ash. People screamed and tried to back away. But their feet would not move. They were rooted in place. Silas's composure cracked. "No," he hissed. The earth beneath them began to crack everywhere, spreading like a web across the village. And from those cracks, something vast began to surface. The listener was coming. Silas's form began to shimmer and distort. His edges blurred. The handsome face melted away, revealing something underneath that had never been human. His skin became translucent, showing hollow emptiness inside. His limbs stretched and multiplied, becoming appendages that reached in impossible directions. His mouth opened far too wide. From it came a sound like 1,000 whispers speaking in terrible unison. The spirit revealed itself fully. A vast, impossible thing made of shadows and collapsed light. Of unspoken words and swallowed truths. The villagers finally understood. Their beloved savior was a parasitic entity that had been feeding on their obedience, growing fat on their unquestioning submission. Some fainted, others wept. "You welcomed me," the listener spoke through Silas's dissolving mouth. "You begged me for help. You gave me your gratitude, your trust, and your will. All I did was accept what you offered freely. The people tried to run, but the ground held them fast. They were bound by every promise made, every word of thanks spoken, and every moment they chose easy comfort over difficult truth. But there was still one thing they had not taken from Kira. Her voice. Kira opened her mouth. After 7 years of silence, she gathered everything she had learned, everything she had observed, and every truth she had held in quiet spaces. And she spoke. Her voice came out rusty at first, cracking like breaking ice. But it grew stronger with each word, clear and steady and undeniable. "You are a lie," she said to the listener. "A parasite wearing kindness as a mask. You offer no real peace, only the peace of surrender. No true prosperity, only stolen life force." The moment she spoke, the listening stone shattered its container with a sound like thunder. It flew across the village, pulled by honest truth, and landed in Kira's bound hands. The ropes fell away like they had never been there. The stone blazed with light, responding to her voice. Amplified by 7 years of accumulated silence, it was finally released. "Every word you spoke was calculated," Kira continued, her voice growing stronger. "Every gesture designed to manipulate. You pretended to give while you only took." The stone pulsed with each truth. The light spread across the village. Where it touched, the listener's influence cracked and peeled away. The people's feet were freed. Their minds cleared. They saw, truly saw, what they had been worshipping. And the listener screamed, the sound of every suppressed truth speaking at once. Kira's grandmother pushed through the freed crowd, carrying the journal from the hidden chamber. She opened it to the final page and read aloud, her voice shaking but determined. "The listener cannot be destroyed, only rejected. But that rejection must be willing, chosen freely, with full knowledge of the cost." She looked at the villagers. "Our ancestors made a pact when they built this village. They promised to remain vigilant, to question easy answers, and to value truth over comfort. Each generation forgot, until the promises became nothing." The listener writhed and twisted, its form unstable. But it still had one weapon left. It gathered itself and spoke to the people's deepest desires. "I can give you everything," it promised, its voice honey-sweet despite its monstrous form. "Real prosperity this time. Just surrender the girl. Let me take her voice permanently. Is one life not worth the happiness of hundreds?" The offer hung in the air, tempting despite everything they had seen. Kira watched people's faces as they considered it. Some turned away ashamed. Others met her eyes with cold calculation. The village elder stepped forward. Kira's heart sank. But then he spoke. "No, we choose differently this time. We choose to see clearly, even when it is hard." More voices joined his. Not everyone, but enough. The village fractured along invisible lines. Those who chose truth stepped toward Kira. Those who chose comfort back toward the entity. The ground split along that exact divide. A physical manifestation of moral choice. Family members stood on opposite sides. Friends faced each other across impossible distance. The village literally tore itself apart. The listener grew stronger from those who still fed it. The stone blazed brighter from those who rejected the lie. Neither side was winning. They were locked in balance. "It has to be unanimous," Kira's grandmother whispered. That was the original pact. Every person must choose truth, or the seal will not hold. Kira looked at the people still standing with the listener. Desperate people. Frightened people. People who had suffered so long they would do anything for a chance at peace. She understood them. She had been hungry too. She had been hopeless too. The difference was she had never let that hunger convince her to look away from truth. "Then I will speak to them," Kira said quietly. She stepped forward alone, walking toward the listener and those it still held. The stone's light dimmed as she moved away from those who supported truth. But Kira kept walking, because wisdom does not shout from safety. Steps forward into danger. And it speaks anyway. Kira stood before those who had chosen comfort, looking into familiar faces. She did not condemn them. Instead, she spoke the final truth. This spirit was not summoned by Silas, Kira said clearly. It was never an outside force. It was born here, created by our own ancestors' cowardice generations ago. Shock rippled through both groups. Our founders were offered a choice. Work hard and build slowly, or make a deal with something dark that promised quick success. They chose the deal. They agreed to feed it their questions, their doubts, and their courage. In exchange, it would give them easy answers. She turned to look at everyone. This village was never cursed by outside forces. We cursed ourselves. Every generation that chose silence over speaking up. Every time someone saw wrong and said nothing. Every moment we picked comfort over conscience. We fed it. We made it strong. The listener tried to speak, but Kira raised the stone and it fell silent. The listener is a mirror, Kira continued. It shows us what we become when we stop questioning, when we surrender our will, when we let fear decide. It is not a demon from outside. It is the demon we create inside when we forget that truth matters more than peace. Understanding dawned on faces. Horror, recognition, collective guilt, but also liberation. Because if they had created it, they could uncreate it. The listener began to collapse inward, forced to confront the weight of its own truth. Every suppressed warning it had silenced, every doubt it had crushed, every voice it had stolen, they all echoed back at once. The sound was unbearable. People covered their ears, but the noise came from inside. From the part of themselves they had surrendered over weeks of easy comfort. They heard their own swallowed doubts, their own ignored warnings, and their own silenced conscience speaking at once. The listener shattered like glass, fragmenting into thousands of pieces. But it did not disappear. Instead, it scattered into the people who had fed it, returning to its source. Everyone who had spoken obedience now carried a shard inside them, a permanent reminder of what they had almost become. The village cracked one final time violently, then fell still. The fields lay barren and black. The prosperity was gone. The false peace had ended. They stood in ruins, facing reality. There are no easy answers, no simple saviors, and no quick paths to happiness. Only the hard work of building something real, something earned, something that cannot be taken because it was never given by anyone else. They stood changed, scarred, and finally truly awake. The village rebuilt slowly. Took years, not weeks. Crops grew at a natural speed. They were hungry again for a while. But this time, hunger did not make them desperate enough to surrender their judgment. They created new traditions. Once a month, they gathered to speak hard truths aloud, to question decisions, and to honor doubt and careful thought. They taught children that silence can be wisdom, but it must be chosen, not forced. That observing clearly is as valuable as speaking loudly. Kira's grandmother passed away peacefully 2 winters later. Before she died, she made Kira promise to keep the listening stone safe, to teach the next generation of keepers. Kira kept that promise. But she did not stay in the village forever. Once she was certain the people understood, once the new traditions were firmly rooted, she left. She traveled from village to village, carrying the stone, watching for signs of the listener's return. Because she knew it would return. It always did. Wherever people chose comfort over truth, wherever silence became submission rather than wisdom, the listener would stir again. But now there were keepers, watching, waiting, ready to speak when the time came. If only they remembered that silence is not weakness but wisdom waiting for its moment. Never mistake quiet for ignorance, nor comfort for truth.